On a cold December morning in Pennsylvania, the echo of hymns filled the grand hall of St. Paul's Church. Among the congregation sat 88-year-old Elellanena Wilson, a woman whose life had been marked by a wound that never healed. For more than 6 decades she had lived with the silence of absence, the unanswered question of what became of her twin daughters who had vanished in 1961. As the choir began to sing, her frail body stiffened. 2 voices rose in perfect harmony, so alike, so achingly familiar, that her heart skipped. For years she had wandered from church to church, clutching hope like a relic. Now, in that instant, she felt time collapse. Her fingers tightened around her worn black purse, the one she never left behind, carrying inside the lavender dress of a little girl, a fragile keepsake of Emily and Sarah. Those voices transported her back to her small home on the edge of Millbrook, when laughter once spilled from the kitchen and the sound of childish humming warmed every corner. But that warmth had been stolen on a March morning when the twins simply disappeared, leaving behind only grief and mystery. The memories rushed in with the weight of a lifetime. She remembered her desperate cries as she tore through the neighborhood, searching, the pitying eyes of neighbors, and the chilling words of her mother-in-law, Mrs. Caldwell. "They've gone to a better place." Caldwell had spoken with the finality of someone who knew more than she would ever admit, hinting at a wealthy family that would offer the girls what Elellanena, a widowed seamstress, could not. It was a wound sharpened by betrayal, one that festered when her mother-in-law carried the truth to her grave just 3 years later. For decades, Eleanor sacrificed everything: her savings, her health, her peace, working multiple jobs and chasing paper trails that always ended and vanished, records and closed doors. Now, as the choir voices swelled through the vaulted ceiling, her breath caught. She looked at the 2 women leading the choir, both around 70 years old, their movements perfectly mirrored. The dimple in their chins, the gray curls framing, their faces, the way their posture matched like a reflection. All of it spoke louder than words. They weren't strangers. They were hers. Michael, her loyal grandson who never let her make her pilgrimages alone, leaned in anxiously. "Grandma, let's go." But she shook her head. Her body trembled, her face pale, but her will anchored her to the pew. Father Patrick, the parish's young priest, began the sermon unaware of the silent storm brewing in the front row. Eleanor's eyes locked on the woman to the left, whose small scar above the eyebrow struck her like lightning. Emily had earned that scar as a child tumbling from a ladder, and the other woman, twisting her ring nervously on her finger, mirrored Sarah's old habit when she once fidgeted with a loop of string. The details were undeniable, and they pierced Eleanor's soul with both hope and dread. When the time came for communion, she rose shakily, each step toward the altar heavy with 64 years of longing. As one of the women placed the wafer, in her palm their eyes met, and for the briefest moment recognition flickered, a tremor of memory neither could explain away. Eleanor's knees weakened, her voice broke into a whisper, and as she faltered, the second woman stepped forward. To catch her, in that fragile embrace of 3 souls, Eleanor felt the impossible, the weight of loss colliding with the miracle of reunion. The woman steadied Eleanor with a gentle grip, and in that instant, the old mother's eyes fell upon a small crescent-shaped mark on the woman's right hand. Her breath caught. It was not just a mark. It was a birthmark she had kissed 1,000 times before tucking Sarah into bed. Tears spilled as her voice quivered. I know you." The 2 women, their faces, mirrors of each other, exchanged startled glances, unsure how to react. The one who seemed to be Emily leaned closer, her arm firm beneath Eleanor's frail weight, while the other, her features softened by shock, whispered with concern, "Mom, can we help you back to your seat?" The words sliced through Eleanor's heart. For 64 years she had rehearsed what she might say if this day ever came, but all she could manage was a whisper that carried the force of destiny. "My daughters were Emily and Sarah." The names fell like a key unlocking a forgotten door. Both women froze, their faces paling, their breath stilled. Slowly, disbelief melted into something raw and terrifyingly real. How do you know our names?" Emily's voice trembled, as her question hung in the hush of the church. The sanctuary seemed to fold in on itself as Eleanor clutched their arms, sobbing freely. She looked to the right, her gaze settling on the woman with the birthmark. "Sarah," she breathed. Then, she turned to the left. Emily. The sound of those names was not just recognition, it was reclamation. And though they had lived for decades as Rebecca and Catherine, something stirred deep in their souls. The names Emily and Sarah rang like a faint bell from a long-forgotten childhood. Father Patrick, sensing a moment of rare gravity, paused his sermon and approached with caution. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Eleanor's hands clung to the women's arms like lifelines. "Father," she said, her voice breaking yet strong in conviction. "These are my daughters, the daughters who were stolen from me 64 years ago." A gasp rippled across the pews. Mrs. Goodwin, an elderly parishioner who had watched Eleanor's lifelong search, pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Good heavens," she whispered. "It's true. It's her. After all these years." The twins guided Eleanor carefully to the front pew, the congregation holding its collective breath as if witnessing a miracle. Sarah's voice cracked. We always knew we were adopted. Our parents told us," her words faltered, "that our mother had abandoned us." Eleanor's answer came swift and sharp, a truth forged in decades of pain. "No," she said firmly, her voice carrying through the silence. "I never abandoned you. You were taken from me." The words hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Emily gripped Eleanor's hand, and in that touch, she felt something unexplainable. An echo of belonging, a memory she couldn't quite grasp, but which lived somewhere deep inside her. "But how can we be sure?" Emily's tears glistened, caught between disbelief and desperate hope. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened her purse, unfolding the bundle of tissue paper. Inside lay the faded lavender dress, so small, so fragile, preserved as though it carried her very heartbeat. The twins gasped. Sarah reached out, fingertips brushing the worn fabric, and with that touch came a flicker of memory. A woman with dark hair, bending close, whispering lullabies she could almost remember. Eleanor's voice pressed forward, steady now, fueled by love and proof. "Emily, when you were 4, you tumbled down the stairs. I carried you to Dr. Anderson, who lived on the back street. The scar above your brow never faded. Sarah, that crescent mark on your hand, I kissed it every night. And you always wound a thread around your finger when nerves got the best of you. These are not things a stranger could know. These are the truths only your mother carries." The twins instinctively touched the marks Eleanor spoke of, their disbelief wavering in the face of undeniable detail. But it was the next act that shattered the walls between them. Eleanor closed her eyes, drew a ragged breath, and began to hum a melody so tender it seemed to rise from the earth itself. "Sleep, my Emily. Sleep, sleep, my Sarah too. For your mother is here, and will not let harm come to you." The lullaby floated into the silence, cracked by tears but whole in its truth. The effect was immediate and devastating. Emily and Sarah turned toward one another, their eyes wide, their lips trembling. It was the song, their song. A melody that had lived inside them for as long as they could remember, surfacing in quiet moments of sorrow or longing. They had sung it to themselves as children without knowing where it came from, a thread of comfort woven into their lives without explanation. Sarah covered her face, her voice muffled by sobs. "No, it can't be." Emily clutched her sister's arm, whispering through tears. "But we've always known this song, always sung it, and we never understood why." Now they knew. The song was not just a tune, it was proof. Proof that their true mother had found them at last. Mrs. Goodwin, who had prayed for decades that her friend would live to see this day, stepped forward with tears glistening in her eyes. "Elellanena, my dear," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "After all these years, it's a miracle." Eleanor turned to her friend with trembling hands and a radiant, fragile smile. "Yes, Mrs. Goodwin," she said, her eyes never leaving the two women beside her. "These are them. These are my Emily and Sarah." Father Patrick, overcome by the magnitude of the moment, lifted his hands toward the hushed congregation. "Brothers and sisters," he said solemnly, "we are witnessing something extraordinary today. Let us bow our heads and pray for this family, torn apart by time, now brought together by God's grace." But even as the church filled with whispered prayers, a storm raged inside Emily. The foundation of her identity trembled. All her life, she had clung to a story, that her birth mother had abandoned her and her sister. To accept Eleanor's truth meant shattering everything she believed about who she was. Her voice, controlled yet strained, cut through the silence. "If you really are our mother, why did you never look for us? Why did we never know you existed?" The question pierced Eleanor's heart like a knife, but her reply came with a fire that only 64 years of longing could forge. "I did look," she said, her voice quivering yet steady. "For 64 years I searched. I walked into every church, every town, hoping to see your faces. I sold everything I had, worked 3 jobs just to keep the search alive. But someone made sure your trail was hidden. I never stopped, not for a single day." Her words struck Sarah, who leaned in, her brow furrowed. "But how could we just disappear?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Our adoptive mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Montgomery, told us our birth mother left us because she couldn't care for us." Eleanor's lips pressed tight as a wave of long-suppressed fury rose within her. "Elizabeth Montgomery," she repeated, her voice sharp. "Yes, I remember that name. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Caldwell, once spoke of her, a wealthy woman who gave work to poor mothers in town. She must have been the one." Emily exchanged a stunned glance with Sarah. "Our adoptive parents were the Montgomerys," she said softly. "Elizabeth and Oliver. They gave us a good education, yes, and a comfortable life. But they also told us our real mother abandoned us. They said it was for the best." Supported by Michael's steady hand, Eleanor forced herself to stand taller, her eyes burning with truth. "I was poor," she admitted, her voice firm. "A seamstress barely making ends meet. But I would never abandon you. That morning, I went to fetch water from the well. When I returned, you were gone. An hour later, Mrs. Caldwell told me a wealthy couple had taken you for a better life. I was too young, too trusting. I believed her lies. But when I went back days later, begging for you, she told me it was too late, that you were gone forever, and that I should forget." Sarah gripped Emily's hand tightly, tears brimming in her eyes as puzzle pieces began to align in the cruelest of ways. "So, we were taken from you. Not by force," Eleanor clarified, her voice trembling, "but by manipulation. Your grandmother convinced me I wasn't enough. She convinced me to let go, and I've regretted it every day of my life." The sisters exchanged a look of heartbreak and recognition. "We always wanted to meet her," Sarah whispered, her voice raw. "We always felt a void." Emily nodded, her face wet with tears. "Even with loving adoptive parents, there was always something missing. Something we couldn't name." Eleanor, her hands shaking, reached out to touch their faces as though afraid they might vanish again. "And yet you grew up strong, beautiful, educated. Perhaps Mrs. Caldwell believed she was doing what was right. Perhaps she thought she was saving you from poverty." She hesitated, her lips trembling. Maybe she was right. But Sarah grasped her hand firmly, shaking her head. "No," she said with sudden conviction. "Money cannot replace a mother's love. We had everything but the one thing that mattered most, you." The church was silent, every soul riveted by the unfolding revelation, when another voice broke the air. From the back pews, an elderly woman, frail yet dignified, rose to her feet and began to walk slowly toward the group. The shuffle of her steps echoed through the still sanctuary. Gasps rippled as people recognized her. It was Mrs. Thornton, 89 years old, who had only recently moved back to town. Her voice trembled as she spoke, each word weighted with decades of secrets. "Excuse me," she said, her eyes darting between Eleanor, Emily, and Sarah. But I know something about what happened to those girls. Mrs. Thornton's frail voice cut through the silence of the church, every word heavy with guilt. I need to speak, she said, her trembling hands clutching her shawl. The congregation turned, eyes fixed on her as she shuffled closer to the front. I worked for Elizabeth and Oliver Montgomery for over 40 years. I cared for these girls from the day they arrived, and I always knew the truth. Her words struck the air like thunder. Eleanor, Emily, and Sarah stared at her, bracing for the revelation she had carried in silence for decades. Emily's voice, sharp with desperation, broke the stillness. What? Truth? Thornton drew a long, shuddering breath. Your adoptive parents paid to keep you. They paid a very large sum, and it wasn't only Eleanor's mother-in-law. They bribed the county clerk, the lawyer, even neighbors who might talk. Everyone had a price. And I took mine. Gasps rippled through the pews. Eleanor clutched Michael's arm as her knees threatened to give way. How much? She whispered. Thornton's answer came flat, as if carved from stone. $5,000. A fortune in 1961. Caldwell took $2,000. The county clerk. And the lawyer split another $2,000, and the rest went to silence others who could have exposed the truth. I accepted $500. More than I earned in 2 years. I had 5 children of my own, and I thought you would have a better life with the Montgomerys. But the guilt never left me. When Mrs. Montgomery grew ill, she confessed in her final days. She said she regretted it all, tearing you away from your true mother. Eleanor sank heavily onto the bench, her voice barely a murmur. Sold. My daughters were sold. The words seemed to drain what little strength she had left. Her eyes filled as the pieces locked cruelly into place. Caldwell bought a new house that year. She told me it was inheritance money. But it was you. It was your lives. Emily shook her head in disbelief, the world she thought she knew, crumbling beneath her. My whole life, she whispered. I believed my mother abandoned me, and now I learn. I was bought. Her voice broke. Did Elizabeth Montgomery truly regret it? Thornton nodded solemnly. Every day at the end. She even wrote a letter, a full confession. But when she died, Dr. Richardson, the family lawyer, took all her papers. He said he would handle everything, but the letter vanished. Sarah leaned forward, her voice trembling. Where is it now? Thornton's reply cut like a blade. Doctor, Richardson still lives in this town. Old, retired, but he knows the truth. He always did. He was paid to make it disappear. Father Patrick stepped in, his voice calm but steady. I know of him. His office is still here. He's very old now, but alive. Sarah's eyes blazed. Then we need to speak to him. Emily nodded, her voice firm despite her tears. I need answers. I need to know everything. Eleanor, looking at the daughters she had finally reclaimed, wept openly. Do you forgive me? For being fooled? For letting them take you? The twins turned to her, their decision instant and unshakable. Together, they wrapped their arms around the frail woman who had fought a lifetime for them. Mom, Emily said, her voice trembling on the word she had never used before. You were deceived by powerful people, but you never stopped searching. That proves you never stopped loving us. Sarah pressed her cheek to Eleanor's. You were young, alone, and they stole us from you. None of this was your fault. The three clung to each other as sobs shook them, and around them the entire church was moved to tears. Mrs. Goodwin whispered a prayer of gratitude, her eyes lifted to the heavens. At last, Michael stepped forward, his voice breaking as he faced the aunts he had just met. I'm Michael, he said, choking back emotion, the son of Grandma's only other child. Her name was Teresa. She spent her whole life helping Grandma look for you. But she passed away 10 years ago. She never lived to see this day. But I promise you, she believed you were alive. The words lingered in the sanctuary, binding past and present together. Emily and Sarah turned their gaze to Michael with tender curiosity, realizing that through him, they were glimpsing a branch of the family they never knew existed. "Did our mother have other daughters?" Sarah asked softly. Michael shook his head. "Only Teresa. Grandma never remarried, never moved on. She said her heart couldn't be whole until she knew what happened to you. Teresa stood by her side her whole life, helping with the search until the day she died." Eleanor nodded, her eyes wet. "Your sister was my anchor. She believed even when I was too tired to believe myself that this day would come." Emily's lips trembled. "We had a sister we never knew," she whispered. Eleanor added gently, "And she passed without meeting you. But she left her children behind. Michael has 2 brothers and a sister. You have nieces and nephews waiting to meet you." The revelation overwhelmed the twins. Their entire lives they had leaned only on each other, yet now they discovered an entire family tree extending beyond their reach. Sarah clasped Eleanor's hand, her voice thick with emotion. "We have children too. I have a daughter, Melissa, and 2 grandchildren." Emily smiled shyly through tears. "I have a son, Christopher, and a granddaughter. Her name is Elellanena." Eleanor gasped, pressing her hand to her chest as if to keep her heart from bursting. "You named her after me?" Emily nodded. "I never knew why that name felt so special. Now I do." Father Patrick, sensing that the flow of confessions could last the entire day, gently intervened. "Let us continue in the sacristy," he said warmly. "This family deserves privacy." He turned to the congregation, who had witnessed the miracle with reverent awe. "Pray for this family, reunited through God's mercy after so many years." In the sacristy, the circle of truth widened. Eleanor leaned forward, her frail hands trembling. "Do you remember anything from when you lived with me?" Emily closed her eyes, chasing foggy memories. "I remember a small house with a backyard and a mango tree," Sarah added slowly, "and a woman's voice, singing us to sleep. But her face was always blurry." Emily's voice brightened with a flash of recollection. "And a tall man. He gave us piggyback rides. He had a mustache and laughed a lot." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "That was your father, John Charles. He adored you. He died in 1959 in a construction accident. You were only 4, but you cried so hard, knowing he wouldn't come back." The room fell into a reverent silence as Sarah whispered, "That's why you worked so much." Eleanor nodded. "I became a seamstress, taking any job I could. Laundry, cooking, cleaning. It was never enough. So when Caldwell insisted a wealthy family could give you what I could not, I was too young, too broken to fight. And I made the worst mistake of my life." Mrs. Thornton, who had been listening quietly, spoke again. "I remember when you arrived at the Montgomery's house. You were sobbing, asking for your mother. Mrs. Montgomery told you she'd gone on a trip. For months you believed she'd return." Sarah's eyes filled. "We asked every day when Mom would come back." Emily's jaw tightened. "Then one day, she said Mom had chosen a new life. That she didn't want us anymore." Eleanor clasped her chest as the cruelty of the lie cut fresh wounds. "To make you believe I abandoned you willingly. That was the deepest cruelty of all." Sarah's voice quivered. "We were angry for years, angry at the woman we thought had left us. Only later did we wonder if there was more to the story. But never this." Emily lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. "Now everything makes sense. The lullaby, the emptiness we could never explain." Michael, who had been silent, leaned forward with quiet strength. "And now? What will you do? How do you recover 64 lost years?" The question hung like a bell tolling in their hearts. Emily drew a steady breath. "First, we find Dr. Richardson. If there is a letter, we need to see it. We need to know every detail." Eleanor's frail hands clasped together, trembling with fragile hope. "And after that?" she asked. Sarah met her gaze, her voice steady. "After that, we become a family again. Not as if the years never happened. We can't erase the past. But we can choose the future. We will know each other, love each other, and never be torn apart again. Emily and Sarah looked at Michael with softened eyes, realizing he was the living link to the sister they had never met. "Did our mother have other daughters?" Sarah asked. Michael shook his head. "Only Teresa. She was Grandma's rock, helping her search until the very end. She passed 10 years ago, but she always believed you would be found." Eleanor nodded, her voice breaking. "Every year she reminded me not to give up. She carried the same hope I did." Emily whispered, stunned. "We had a sister we never knew, and she died before meeting us." Eleanor added gently, "But she left you family. Michael has 2 brothers and a sister. You have nieces and nephews." Sarah pressed a hand to her heart. "And we have children, too. I have a daughter, Melissa, and 2 grandchildren." Emily smiled through tears. "I have a son, Christopher, and a granddaughter. Her name is Elellanena. I never knew why that name felt special. Now I do." Eleanor gasped, joy breaking through decades of sorrow. "You named her after me." "Yes," Emily said softly. "It was always a name I carried in my heart." "Father," Patrick, sensing the tide of emotions could flow endlessly, gently guided them. "Let us move to the sacristy where you may speak privately." Turning to the congregation, he said with solemnity, "Today we have witnessed a miracle. Pray for this family reunited after so many years." Behind closed doors, revelations continued to unfold. "Do you remember anything from when you lived with me?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Emily closed her eyes. "A small house, a mango tree in the backyard," Sarah added, "and a voice, a lullaby before bed. The face is blurry, but the voice stays." Emily brightened. "A tall man with a mustache. He gave us piggyback rides." Eleanor smiled through tears. "Your father, John Charles. He adored you. He died in a construction accident when you were only 4. I worked as a seamstress afterward, taking any job I could. When Mrs. Caldwell told me another family could give you more, I was too young and too desperate to see the cruelty behind it." Mrs. Thornton, guilt still etched on her face, spoke again. "I remember when you arrived at the Montgomerys. You sobbed, asking for your mother. Elizabeth told you she was on a trip and would return. For months you waited." Sarah's voice cracked. "We asked every day when she would come back." Emily swallowed hard. "Then she told us you had chosen a new life without us." Eleanor's face crumpled, her voice filled with anguish. "How cruel, to make you believe I abandoned you willingly." Sarah whispered, "We were angry for years. Only later did we wonder if there was more. But never this." Michael finally broke his silence. "And now? How do you recover 64 lost years?" Emily answered firmly. "First, we need to speak with Dr. Richardson. If he holds that letter, we need to see it." Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. "And after that?" Sarah reached for her mother's hand. "After that, we'll be a family again. Not as if time never passed. We can't change history, but we can build a future together." Emily added softly, "Our children will meet their grandmother. Our grandchildren will know where they truly come from." For the first time in decades, Eleanor smiled with joy. "I have a notebook," she said. "Every year I wrote you letters. 64, in total. I kept pictures, your baby clothes, even a little shoe Emily lost before you vanished. I believed one day I would give them back." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You carried us in your heart all these years." Father Patrick returned with news. "Dr. Richardson will see you today at 2 o'clock. He said he has been waiting for this day, and he has documents you must see." The weight of destiny hung in the air. Sarah squeezed her sister's hand. "Then, let's be ready." But, before the meeting, Emily and Sarah wanted to bridge past and present. "Come home with us," Emily said. "Meet our children. Meet the family you never knew." Eleanor's smile widened. "I would love to." Michael offered to drive, and as they left the church, Eleanor walked between her daughters, her arms linked with theirs. Mrs. Goodwin, waiting at the door, wept openly. God heard our prayers at last. Eleanor embraced her. Thank you for carrying hope with me. Thornton, her face lined with regret, whispered another apology. Eleanor touched her arm gently. The truth matters now. That's enough. The drive to Emily's home was quiet, each woman lost in the immensity of what had happened. For Eleanor, it was the realization of a dream she had clung to for 64 years. For Emily and Sarah, it was the rewriting of their entire lives. And for Michael, it was the living proof that hope, no matter how fragile, can survive across generations. Emily and Sarah exchanged a look, steadying themselves as Dr. Richardson's voice carried the weight of buried decades. The lawyer's eyes, though clouded with age, remained sharp, the kind of gaze that had once persuaded judges and silenced witnesses. So, you are the twins Mrs. Montgomery adopted in 1961, he repeated, almost as if reciting from a ledger engraved in his memory. Emily lifted her chin, her voice calm but firm. We are, but we now know it wasn't a true adoption, was it? It was a transaction. The old man's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the cane a little harder as he lowered himself into a leather chair. You've come for the truth, I suppose, he said with a weary sigh. And after all these years, perhaps it is time. Eleanor, frail yet fierce, leaned forward from her seat, her voice trembling with urgency. I searched for 64 years. I deserve to know everything. Tell me, why? Why did you help take my daughters from me? The lawyer's face betrayed a flicker of shame before his professional mask returned. Because, he said slowly, I was paid to. The Montgomerys were desperate. Elizabeth could not bear children, and Oliver wanted heirs to carry his name. They had wealth, influence, and they knew how to use it. Your mother-in-law, Mrs. Caldwell, facilitated the arrangement. I was asked to make it legal on paper, or at least appear so. Sarah's voice shook as she demanded, You falsified records. You erased us. Dr. Richardson nodded gravely. Birth certificates were altered. Court filings destroyed. I bribed clerks, filed fake guardianship transfers. You must understand, the Montgomerys weren't the only ones who came to me back then. It was common among the wealthy to buy their way into the families they couldn't build naturally. But yours, he paused, looking at Eleanor with something like regret. Yours haunted me more than any other, because I saw the pain in your mother's eyes even then. She was tricked, manipulated, and still, I did nothing. Emily's hands balled into fists. And what about this letter Mrs. Montgomery wrote? Mrs. Thornton said you took it. Richardson's eyes softened, and for a moment the mask cracked. Yes, Elizabeth's letter. She gave it to me as she was dying. A confession, every detail laid out in her own handwriting. I kept it safe, waiting for the day you would come. He pushed himself up slowly and crossed the room, opening a locked cabinet with shaking hands. From a worn envelope yellowed. With time, he withdrew a folded letter, its ink faded but legible. He held it out with both hands, as though it were a sacred relic. This belongs to you. Eleanor reached first, her fingers trembling as she touched the envelope. Emily and Sarah leaned close, their breaths shallow, as the truth they had been, denied for a lifetime, rested at last within reach. Dr. Richardson's voice was steady, but the room itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the revelations. Mrs. Eleanor, he said softly, I have been expecting you for years. When Elizabeth Montgomery passed, she left these letters in my care with strict instructions. She knew this day would come, that the truth could not remain buried forever. From the filing cabinet, he retrieved a folder worn thin by time, its corners frayed, its pages yellowed. Eleanor's breath caught when she saw the bundle, as though she were staring at the proof of her life's grief and her daughter's stolen childhoods bound in paper. Richardson laid the folder on the table but kept his hand on it for a moment. Before you read, understand. These letters are confessions, but they are also filled with contradictions. Regret and guilt intertwined with justifications. Emily and Sarah leaned closer as Richardson slowly handed over the first letter. Eleanor's trembling fingers brushed the fragile paper before passing it to Emily. Her daughter unfolded the pages, the ink faded but the words still painfully clear. Emily began to read aloud, her voice uneven. My dear Emily and Sarah, if you are reading this, it means the truth has finally reached you, and I am no longer alive to say these words in person. What I did to your mother was terrible, unforgivable, and yet at the time I was blinded by desperation. Oliver and I had tried for over 15 years to have children. We lost many babies. We wept for each one. When Mrs. Caldwell came to me offering you, I thought only of my own longing. I never considered the devastation I would bring to your true mother's heart. The room was silent except for the quiver in Emily's voice as she continued. I told myself I would give you comfort, safety, education, all the things Eleanor could not provide. But in my selfishness, I erased her. Worse still, I destroyed her reputation to keep her away. I paid people to whisper lies, that she was unstable, that she had abandoned you by choice. Whenever she came close, I intervened. In 1987, when she was about to uncover a lead, I buried it. In 1995, she was close again, and I destroyed her chance a second time. Each time I told myself it was to protect you, but in truth, it was to protect myself. I lived in fear you would discover her and love her more than me. Sarah's eyes brimmed as she reached for her sister's hand. She sabotaged every attempt, every single time. Eleanor's shoulders slumped, tears flowing freely. Emily, read on. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. I know Eleanor will never forget what I took from her. But you must know this. I loved you. With all my heart, I loved you. You were my daughters in every way but blood. And though my actions were rooted in selfishness, the years we spent together were the greatest blessing of my life. I ask only that you remember me not as a thief, but as a broken woman who made a terrible choice out of longing and fear. When Emily lowered the letter, silence blanketed the room, heavy and suffocating. Sarah whispered, almost to herself. She was both our captor and our caretaker. Eleanor wiped her eyes, her voice breaking as she looked at her daughters. She may have loved you, but she stole my life to do it. She stole yours too. Dr. Richardson, his hands resting heavily on his cane, added quietly, there are more letters. Each one speaks of her torment, her remorse. She wanted you to know the truth, that she wronged your mother, and in doing so wronged you as well. The sisters sat in stunned silence, torn between grief and the faint thread of compassion. For the woman who had deceived them, for Eleanor, the words were confirmation of everything she had long suspected. Yet seeing them in ink, in Elizabeth Montgomery's own hand, gave the wound a new, raw edge. 64 years of searching, of loss, of yearning, all crystallized in the frail pages now trembling in her daughter's hands. The room seemed to stop breathing as Emily's voice trailed off on the last line of Elizabeth Montgomery's confession. Eleanor's sobs broke the silence, raw and unrestrained, her frail hands shaking as Sarah cupped her face and Emily clutched her shoulder. She kept my things? Eleanor whispered, her voice both astonished and wounded. Dr. Richardson nodded gravely, lifting a small wooden box from his briefcase. She asked me to return this to you when the time came. Eleanor's trembling fingers opened the lid, and gasps filled the room. Inside lay snapshots of her youth, a faded letter she had written to the sheriff in 1961, her crucifix worn thin with decades of prayer, and 2 tiny locks of hair, tied with ribbons, a pink one, a blue one. A handwritten note read, Emily and Sarah, 6 years old, March 1961. Eleanor let out a strangled cry and slumped back, nearly fainting as Michael rushed to steady her. She pressed the locks of hair to her chest, rocking them like the babies she had lost, her voice barely audible. She cut your hair before changing your names. She planned everything, and yet she couldn't let go. The mix of love and calculation was chilling, proof that Elizabeth had cherished the girls, even as she conspired to erase their mother. Richardson cleared his throat, pulling out another folder to redirect the torrent of emotions. There is more, he said gently. Emily took the first paper he handed over. Her breath caught as she read, Received from Mrs. Elizabeth Montgomery the sum of $2,200 for services rendered. Caldwell, March 1961. Sarah unfolded another document. County Clerk's Office Registry Amendment. Rebecca Montgomery, formerly Emily Wilson, and Catherine Montgomery, formerly Sarah Wilson. Fee, $1,000. March 1961. Eleanor's eyes hardened as she picked up a third. Confidential information. Eleanor Wilson, the biological mother, is a woman of questionable morals. Frequently abandons her daughters to engage in prostitution. Should not be given assistance or information. Payment for service, $100. John, County Clerk's Office, April 1961. Her voice cracked with rage and anguish. She made me out to be a prostitute. That's why people turned away when I begged for help. They all thought I was filth. Emily's face burned red with fury. That explains why every door slammed in your face, why no one ever listened. Sarah pulled another sheet, her voice trembling as she read aloud. Report. Eleanor Wilson was at the Fairview County Clerk's Office today, seeking information about her daughters. I informed her as instructed that she had a history of child abandonment. She left crying. Payment, $50. Joseph Martin, May 1963. Sarah looked up, her eyes shining with grief. 2 years after we disappeared, you were still fighting for us. Eleanor clasped her daughter's hands, her tears falling. Onto the yellowed pages. I never stopped, not for a single day. Richardson stepped back to the cabinet and retrieved another box, setting it gently on the table. These, he said softly, are intercepted letters. Eleanor wrote them to sheriffs, judges, and state offices. Elizabeth used her network to make sure many never reached their destinations. Eleanor's breath caught as she opened the box. Dozens of envelopes, her own handwriting staring back at her like ghosts of the past. The first one she picked up read, To the Honorable Sheriff, I write to request assistance in locating my twin daughters, Emily and Sarah Wilson, who disappeared in March 1961. April 1961. Another. Dear Judge, it has been 5 years since my daughters vanished. Each letter was a time capsule of agony, preserved in silence. Eleanor's hands trembled as she flipped through decades of her own pleas, every word a testament to her unbreakable love. The truth lay spread before them now, not just in Elizabeth's confession, but in the receipts, the lies, the intercepted cries for justice. Emily and Sarah's lives had been rewritten by other people's choices. Eleanor's life had been shattered by betrayal, and yet, sitting together in that quiet room, the three women felt the fragile beginnings of restoration. The last letter Eleanor held in her trembling hands carried words written with fading ink but eternal weight. If you ever find Elellanena, tell her I died deeply regretting what I did. Tell her she is a brave and persistent mother who never gave up searching for the daughters she loves. Tell her I recognize she is your true mother, and that I was only someone who had the privilege of caring for you for a while. When Emily's voice broke and fell silent, the room seemed to dissolve into stillness. Eleanor's tears flowed uncontrollably as Sarah cradled her face and Emily gently wiped her cheeks. She kept my things? Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking like porcelain. Dr. Richardson nodded and produced a small wooden box. Inside were artifacts of stolen years, photographs of Eleanor as a young mother, the crucifix that once never left her neck, the letter she had written to the sheriff in 1961, and 2 delicate locks of hair tied with ribbons, labeled in a shaky hand. Emily and Sarah, 6 years old. March 1961. The sight made Eleanor clutch them to her chest, collapsing under the weight of both cruelty and tenderness. Then came the papers, the bribes, the forged amendments, the lies whispered into official records. Each sheet was a wound, reopened. Caldwell's receipt of $2,200, the county clerk's registry fee of $1,000, and the note branding Eleanor a prostitute to poison her reputation. All these years, Eleanor whispered. When I begged for help, they already believed the lies. Emily's jaw trembled with fury. That explains why doors always shut in your face. Sarah read another paper. Her mother recorded crying at a clerk's office. In 1963, dismissed as an unfit woman. You never stopped fighting, Sarah said, voice breaking. Not one day, Eleanor whispered back. When Richardson revealed the second box, filled with intercepted letters stretching across decades, from 1961 to 2019, the twins were stunned into silence. She silenced you for 58 years, Sarah murmured. Even after she died, people still kept the secret. Michael, voice trembling with restrained anger, asked the lawyer, "Why didn't you ever speak?" Richardson lowered his gaze. "Because she bound me by oath. She told me the truth should only be revealed if fate reunited you naturally, and I obeyed." Emily frowned. "But you kept her confession." Richardson nodded. "Because she wanted you to know that at the end, remorse consumed her." Eleanor carefully gathered the folders to her chest. "Now I finally understand why every step I took was blocked. Why people turned me away with cold stares." Sarah squeezed her hand. "And we finally understand why we could never find you." Then came the question of forgiveness. Emily asked, "Mom, have you forgiven her?" Eleanor took a long, pained breath. "I cannot say I have forgiven her completely. The wound is too deep. But I can say I understand. She was desperate. She loved you in her way, even as she destroyed me." The sisters exchanged a look heavy with conflict. "She gave us love and opportunity," Emily whispered. "But she also stole 64 years with you." Sarah nodded. "I think both truths can live together. Gratitude and sorrow side by side." Richardson, leaning on his cane, offered one last revelation. Elizabeth had left $50,000. Eleanor refused immediately. "I want no money soaked in betrayal." Emily agreed. "But," Sarah suggested, "then let it heal others. Donate it." Richardson smiled faintly. Elizabeth foresaw this. Her second instruction was that if you refused, the money should go to the town's maternity ward. Eleanor nodded. "That's fitting." When they stepped out into the fading afternoon light, it was nearly 5 o'clock. The day had begun, with hymns in a church pew, and ended with truth laid bare in dusty letters and receipts. In the car, Eleanor asked softly, "Would you like me to call you Emily and Sarah again?" The twins looked at each other, torn between the identities they had lived with for decades, and the names written in their blood. Emily smiled faintly. "I can be both. Emily for you, Rebecca for the world I've lived in." Sarah added, "Sarah, for you, Catherine, for everyone else. We carry both lives now." Eleanor's heart swelled as she pressed their hands. "Then let me meet my grandchildren and great-grandchildren properly. Tell me everything about your lives, and you must know about mine, about Teresa, about your father, about all the years between us. We have so much time to make up for." That evening, as the family gathered around Emily's dining table, the air felt thick with both the strangeness of new bonds and the warmth of long-lost love finally restored. Eleanor held her daughter's hands tightly during the blessing, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Lord, thank you for letting me live long enough to see this day. Thank you for bringing my daughters back to me, and for allowing me to know my grandchildren and great-grandchildren." A chorus of Amen rose around the table, and for the first time in 64 years, they shared a meal as one family. Over dinner, laughter and tears mingled as stories spilled out. Eleanor recounted Emily and Sarah's first steps, their mischievous giggles when they were small. The twins, in turn, told of their journeys into adulthood, how fate had reintroduced them as teenagers without them realizing they were sisters, and how they had pieced the truth together. The revelation left Eleanor in awe. Elizabeth had separated them, but still orchestrated for them to remain within reach, as if guilt and maternal instinct warred inside her even in her deception. The younger generations listened wide-eyed, drinking, in the story that had shaped them without their knowing. 16-year-old Elellanena clung to her great-grandmother's every word. Peter declared her the bravest person he had ever met, and little Anna curled into her lap with the ease of a child who instinctively recognized family. Eleanor told them softly, "I never stopped searching. Even in my darkest days, I knew you were alive. A dream, a song, a child on the street. Something always pushed me forward." And when Peter called her brave, she smiled tenderly. No, sweetheart. I am only a mother who loves her children. Any mother would do the same. From that night forward, their lives shifted. Eleanor alternated weeks at Emily's and Sarah's homes, weaving herself into daily life with the children and grandchildren. Sundays became sacred family days, meals heavy with food and fuller still with conversation. A week later, the three women stood side by side in the choir loft of St. Paul's Church. Their voices, two strong and seasoned, one trembling with age, rose in harmony. The congregation wept openly at the sight of a mother singing once more, with the daughters stolen from her. After Mass, Mrs. Goodwin clasped Eleanor's hand, her own eyes wet. "How are you feeling, my dear?" Eleanor turned to look at her daughters, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, laughter and love circling around them like light. Her smile was radiant. "I feel whole," she said simply. "For the first time in 64 years, I feel whole." In the weeks that followed, the rhythms of loss gave way to new rituals. Afternoon walks, Sunday feasts, shared prayers, and long evenings spent telling stories of the years that had been stolen. Though the past could never be erased, together they were writing a new chapter, one born not of grief, but of restoration, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. On Saturday afternoons, Eleanor carried her notebook of 64 letters to Emily's and Sarah's homes, her voice trembling yet proud as she read one each week. Every page carried her life across the lost decades, her joys, her struggles, her faith, and always the promise, "I will never stop searching for you." Emily answered by opening her photo albums, carefully narrating each image: a graduation, cap, a wedding kiss, a newborn's cry, so their mother could feel the moments she had been denied. Sarah added music to their healing. She placed Eleanor's fingers on the keyboard and guided her patiently. To everyone's amazement, Eleanor's natural ear for melody let her learn quickly, and soon she was playing alongside her daughters in the choir that had once brought them back together. 6 months later, young Elellanena stood before her school, delivering a presentation that stunned classmates and teachers alike. She spoke of her great-grandmother who had searched for 64 years, of the twins who had been separated but found their way home, and of the truth that love, real love, never surrenders. Her closing words echoed with power. When we truly love someone, we never give up on them. Even when the world tells us to let go, true love always finds a way. The school was so moved that the principal asked her to share it at the parents' meeting, and soon the entire town knew the story of the mother who found her twins after 6 decades. 1 year after the reunion, on the same Sunday morning that had changed their lives, Eleanor, Emily, and Sarah stood once more in St. Paul's Church. Father Patrick led a special Thanksgiving Mass, then guided them outside where they planted a rose bush in the church garden. Eleanor held her daughter's hands, her eyes shining with joy as she said, "I lost 64 years with you, but I have the rest of my life, and now I see it was worth the wait, because you grew into extraordinary women, loving mothers, and, together, you've given me the big family I always dreamed of." Tears ran down Emily's and Sarah's cheeks as they embraced her. "Thank you for never giving up on us," Emily whispered. "And thank you for teaching us what a mother's love truly is," Sarah added. At 89, Eleanor finally lived the life she had prayed for. Her daughters by her side, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounding her, she was no longer a woman defined by loss, but by love restored. On quiet evenings, Emily and Sarah visited her small home between theirs, and Eleanor would hum the lullaby she once sang to them as children. Only now, the words were different. "They're back, my Emily and Sarah. Back to their mama again. Now we are together, and no one will ever part us, never again." And so, a story that began in grief closed in harmony. A mother's love, unyielding, unbreakable, had carried across decades of silence and lies, until at last it brought her family home.